You know, my guess is that no one since Henry Clay has been introduced as a statesman more often than George Shultz. For decades, you could be forgiven if you thought that there was some constitutional requirement that presidents call on George for service to the country. Mr. Shultz has served as Secretary of Labor, Director of the OMB, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of the State. And while the textbooks tell you that James Schlesinger was our nation's first Secretary of Energy, the truth is that in 1973, when the first oil embargo happened, while George Shultz was Secretary of the Treasury, he was called upon to help the president figure out what to do with the nation's energy policy, and he's been working on energy issues ever since. As Secretary of State, George Shultz was responsible for the negotiation of the Montreal Protocol, which stands as the most effective climate change treaty our planet has ever seen, protecting the stratospheric ozone layer from the hole that had been developing due to chlorofluorocarbons. In California, George Shultz led the successful effort to defend the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, which is the nation's most comprehensive climate change law. At Stanford's Hoover Institution, he has been a key thought leader on energy, on the need to continue investing in R&D, on favoring a revenue-neutral carbon tax. And he's been outspoken about the need to develop our shale resource in an environmentally responsible way. At this moment in our country, when partisanship is at an extreme, people like George Shultz are indispensable for progress. He's the rare political leader who puts the nation's common good before a party's interest. As President Lincoln said of Henry Clay, whatever he did for the whole country. Secretary George Shultz.
Thank you, Fred. I have been asked to talk about security issues. So let me say, my bottom line is that we have a huge opportunity for much more secure energy than in a great many years. However, that bottom line has lots of quibbles to it. So I'm going to get at it by going through four things. First of all, what is the world like today? How has it evolved? Because the state of the world has a big impact on our security. Second, I want to relate an experience I had, Brett alluded to it, that taught me a lot about this subject. Then I want to talk something about our opportunities and why they're so great. And then one special problem that I don't think is getting the attention it needs. So that's my agenda. First of all, what's the world like? At the end of World War II, some gifted people in the Truman administration looked back, and what did they see? They saw two world wars. They saw the first one was settled in rather vindictive terms that helped lead to the second. They saw 70 million people were killed in the Second World War, let alone injured, displaced. They saw the Holocaust. They saw the Great Depression and the protectionism and currency manipulation that aggravated it. And they said to themselves, what a crummy world. And we're part of it, whether we like it or not. So they set out to create something better. with leadership from the U.S., but working with our allies. The Bretton Woods system was created. Then along came the Cold War, concept of containment, NATO, the Marshall Plan. We reached out to our adversaries, Germany and Japan. They became part of the positive side of the world. There was development of good economic matters gradually, almost on a nonpartisan basis. There was built a security and economic commons, and everybody benefited from it. I can remember talking to Deng Xiaoping in the 80s. He told me, China's now ready for the 2 openings. I said, what are they? He said, well, first of all, opening within China, and people will be able to move around. Second opening is to the outside world, and he said, I'm glad there's a reasonably coherent world to open up to. He got it. And I think one could say by the time Ronald Reagan stepped off the stage, the Cold War had basically, was all over but the shouting. And there was a different world out there. There was a certain coherence to it. Now what has happened? Almost suddenly, for a variety of reasons that I won't take your time up with, this world, this security and economic commons has fallen apart. And we look out at a world awash in change. Almost everywhere you look, change. Sometimes very chaotic change is taking place. It isn't just in the Middle East, but it's all over the place. It's pervasive. So somehow, this is the environment we're in. And as the United States in the early times was the country that came with ideas and resources and gave leadership, that doesn't mean we got our way, but it meant that things happened when we came. We're not there. The operative word is withdraw. And from the standpoint of our conduct, the operative word is empty threats. I remember I was a Marine boot camp at the start of World War II. I remember the day the sergeant handed me my rifle. He said, take good care of this rifle. This is your best friend. And remember one thing, he said, never point this rifle at anybody unless you're willing to pull the trigger. No empty threats. You have no credibility when your threats are empty. So we have a world awash in change, and it doesn't have any leadership. It's ominous. So within that framework, what is our energy situation? Well, let me tell a story about my time when I was Secretary of the Treasury. I had earlier studied the oil import issues when I was head of a cabinet task force on that subject. And I early, in my role at OMB, helped create the Environmental Protection Agency and seen the Clean Air Act get started. So I was aware of the environmental issues. But all of a sudden, there comes at us, the Arab oil boycott, which we had more or less predicted that something like that would happen. But all of a sudden, our oil is cut off. It was tremendous impact. There was no energy department. I became the de facto Secretary of Energy. And my deputy, Bill Simon, was the leading edge. He loved it. But at that time, a lot of electricity was produced by oil. No Christmas lights. Gas stations closed on weekends. Let our economy in a mess. It made an impact on me. That any time you look at energy issues, you have to have in your mind security, economics, and the environment. If you walk away from any one of those issues, you're in trouble. I might say today, the Keystone Pipeline, it's an absolute no-brainer. That is oil that does not go through the Strait of Hormuz. If suddenly our supplies in the Middle East were to change radically, anybody here would be surprised. I think they've been doing a pretty good job of keeping it going, but it's a very volatile situation. So we need secure sources. And now my third point, we have every reason to be optimistic about what's going on around here. We've heard this morning about the arrangements that made here in Colorado that basically say, yes, there are ways to go about this dramatically impacting fracking technology that's produced a revolution in natural gas and to a lesser extent crude oil. That can be done properly. We can solve that problem. Let's do it. It's amazing because here you have this energy business, and it's a gigantic business. And people say it'll take decades to turn it around. But this natural gas thing has hit, and it's different. In the space of a few years, made a big, big difference. So that's very hopeful for us. We also have partners to our north in Canada who are major producers. I might say Canada is not only a major producer of oil and gas, but also electricity from hydro sources, some of which they sell to us. Clean energy. Don't look down your nose at Canada. They do okay. Then if we look a little south, big things are going on in Mexico. The new president, rather than say, I won, and so here's my agenda, and try to ram it through, says, I won, and let's all get together. And he created a compact with the other political parties on certain major things. And he's getting them done on education, on structure of industry, and now on energy. And it looks as though these reforms are going to stick. And when they do, there will be a very large increase in oil and gas supplies from Mexico. It'll also have a big impact on Mexico. I might say that fertility in Mexico has gone down like this. It's now down at replacement level. It'll probably go a little below. It shouldn't be a surprise to learn that net immigration of Mexicans to the U.S. last year was 0. More U.S. went to Mexico than the other way around. Around 230 million U.S., Canadian, Mexicans wandered around in each other's countries legally last year. So what I'm saying is, North America has arrived. Let's recognize it. Let's nourish it. Because if you look at it that way, with the prospective supplies of energy in Mexico, in Canada, and the U.S., we are absolutely going to have a secure sources of supply. So from our national security standpoint, that's a huge thing. But I think the security of supply goes much further than what can be done with these kinds of sources. And I have the great privilege of being able to see what's going on at both Stanford and MIT in terms of research or R&D in the energy sphere. And having a sense as a result of what's going on elsewhere and around the world. The answer is a tremendous amount is going on, much more than any other time in our history. First-class people really taking on subjects in a way that's getting somewhere. I mean, they're really getting somewhere. And so as these R&D efforts mature and turn into operative enterprises, they're going to be giving us energy from the sun. They're going to be giving us energy from wind. They're going to figure out how to get energy out of all kinds of things. And we're going to have a revolution coming at us from that side if we continue the support for energy R&D, which we must do. So take it all together. If you look at it just North America, and I urge you to think North America, we're looking good. We can heave a sigh of relief. We have secure sources of supply. To be sure, we embed this in a world awash in change. But nevertheless, to a certain extent right now, we're in the catbird seat. Now, let me mention the problem that I said I wanted to talk about a little bit at the beginning. I am increasingly impressed with how vulnerable our grid is. Of course, we've seen with big natural events like Sandy what happens. But we read about the possibilities of cyber attacks, and they're all too real. That's not a joke. And then we see what a terrorist group can do. There was a widely written about recent incident in San Jose where apparently about 6 or 8 people, very professionally, in the dead of night where they're not seen, and they just basically took out a big transformer. And that had gigantic implications. They had somebody posted, they got away before anybody could. Nobody knows to this day who did it. But it has huge complications. So I say that we should pay a lot of attention to generating more energy where we use it. I'm not saying shut down the grid or anything like that, no. But I'm saying that we should have an insurance policy. If I'm running a naval base somewhere, or I'm running a big company, or I'm running a hospital, or I'm running a research organization that's very sensitive to continuity in my supply of electricity, I better have a substantial backup. And I better have a way of supplementing that, surging it a little bit if I need to. Because you can get cut off just like that. Now, how do you do that? Well, a lot of solar power is pretty local, and a lot of wind is. Not all of it, because you have these big projects, and they are also in the grid. But there's a lot of it that's much more local. There's an interesting company in Silicon Valley named Bloom Energy that I have been interested in here. Bloom Energy has figured out a way to assemble a lot of fuel cells in a device that looks about the size of a pickup truck. In other words, pretty good sized. They have their computer over it and whatnot. And they use natural gas. They put the natural gas over this setup, and they produce large-scale energy, electricity. So you can park it somewhere. And it's interesting that in places like the Sandy and so on, the one source of energy that didn't go dry was natural gas. I guess because of the buried pipeline, it was secure. And so the Bloom Energy electricity and Sandy was about the only thing left standing. I keep telling the guy who invented it that natural gas is fine, but there are a lot of people at MIT and Stanford and probably elsewhere that are working hard on how you get hydrogen out of water, any kind of water, salt water, brackish water. So suppose you can do that. Well, then you can put the hydrogen over your fuel cells. And if you're running a naval base somewhere, you got plenty of water. You don't have to import it from anywhere. Furthermore, if you happen to be someplace that's out a little remote, you not only get your electricity, but you also get potable water. I haven't made a dent in him. He's hooked on natural gas. But I'll keep trying. And I keep watching these researchers who are working away on how you get hydrogen out of water. And I mean, they know how to do it. The question is, how do you do it economically? So that's my story. The world is awash in change. But we are fortunate that we have a kind of golden moment for getting ourselves assured supply, secure energy, particularly if we think of it in terms of North America. But I think we need to pay attention to creating more energy where we use it. And there's one other thing. This morning, we were shown a bunch of slides on how lots of people are doubters, or I guess they call them deniers, that there's any such thing as global warming. Well, I'm impressed with the science myself, and I hear people say, well, the Arctic air is getting warmer, and that changes the confluence and interaction of that warm air with what's below it, and the jet stream now moves slower and a different pattern, and that's why we're having all these downpours. It's all caused by global warming. Joe Sixpack doesn't buy it. I don't know whether I even buy it. But you can observe the emergence of a new ocean in the Arctic. That's not a science, that's not a model, that's an observation. And there's a video that Gary Ruffhead has shown me that shows the sea ice melting goes along very gradually, and then all of a sudden there's a discontinuity. It's as though it's being swallowed. I might say the discontinuities are something you better worry about, because they can happen. So I conclude from that. That's not a one-off event, that's a trend. Just as it's a trend in Greenland, it's a trend in the Tibetan Plateau. These places are melting. So global warming, I think, is a reality today, and it is going to become more so. And we need to be paying a lot of attention. Because in the end, if we talk about security, let alone other things, but just security, the disruptive effects that you can get from all the things that would be associated with global warming are very disruptive. And I think if we aren't doing today whatever we can do to deal with this phenomenon, we're not doing right by future generations, let alone our own. Thank you. According to this screen here that keeps blinking at me, I still have 8 minutes and 40 seconds to go. So if anybody has a question, I'd be glad to respond. There's one right down here.
Yes, I'm just curious, if we become energy independent, which we may very well become as a country, might it lead to us becoming more isolationist in our foreign policy? And is this of a concern to you?
The question, in case you couldn't hear it, is, if we become more energy independent, then can we care less about the rest of the world? and we become more relaxed, right? Something like that. I don't think so. I think as these statesmen in the Truman administration said after World War II, it's a crummy world, and we're part of it, whether we like it or not. We're going to be affected by what goes on. So I think we need to regain our leadership role. We need to step up. That doesn't mean in the ways we're the world's policemen or we're putting boots on the ground all over the place. But it means that we come with ideas and we come with resources. We lead. I might say in the Reagan administration, we were strong. And people knew that if we said we'd do something, we would. But we only used force 3 times. Once in Grenada, basically to rescue 300 American hostages and put back a democratic regime instead of the murderous Cuban regime that had taken over there. We went in, we did the job, and we left. Then when Gaddafi gave orders that wound up in the death of a few of our servicemen in Berlin, we knew precisely the building from which the orders came in Tripoli, and we took the building out with a beautifully executed joint Air Force-Navy operation. And when the Iranians were messing around with Kuwaiti shipping, we reflagged the ships. While the president of Iran was making a speech somewhere saying, there's no way in the world Iran would put a mine in the Persian Gulf, our Navy was taking pictures of them doing it. We boarded the ship, took off some mines for evidence, took off the sailors, sank the ship, took the sailors to Dubai and said, come and get your sailors and cut it out. So we exposed the lie. We know that we knew what was going on and there were consequences. I might say in that operation there was no loss of life on any side. People say we didn't communicate with Iran. I thought we communicated pretty clear. But you don't have to have these huge invasions in order to make your point. But we have to be ready to lead. Just what this downsizing of our military is going to lead to, I'm not too sure. I see that it's probably sensible to have a smaller army, but we need a strong army. And we need people around the world to realize that we have power and we will use it if we must, but we can use it in smart ways. And there are a lot of smart ways. So I don't think that we should go isolationist just because we have an ability to sort of secure our energy and many other things. Because we're part of the world, a big part of the world, whether we like it or not. And we have a stake in what goes on. And if we handle it right, we can have a major impact. Well, thank you very much.